Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Gabriel Foley, Executive Director of Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, and I'm your host today. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you afterward. We'll be putting links in the chat, but in case you missed them, please know that we'll be sending an email to everyone who registered, and it will contain all the links referenced today, as well as a link to a recording. Automated captions are available for this webinar. You can turn them on by clicking on the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have during the presentations using the Q&A box. Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, or MBCP, is a nonprofit organization working to conserve Maryland's birds and the habitats they rely on. At MBCP, we know that by working together, we can accomplish more than any one group can do alone. That's why we emphasize partnerships and collaboration to improve the environment for both birds and people. Our goal is simple: move the needle on bird conservation. But we can't do that without your support. Please consider donating to MBCP via marylandbirds.org/donate. Your support will fund on-the-ground conservation, like our Farmland Raptor program that's installing and monitoring nest sites for some of our most vulnerable raptors. Research, like using Maryland's breeding bird atlas data to identify the critical threat for our birds. And outreach, like Bird City, Maryland, a recognition program that encourages conservation action that you're going to hear more about shortly. Together, we can make Maryland a better place for birds. Visit marylandbirds.org/donate now or scan the code on your screen with your phone. Thank you for caring about birds, and a special thank you to all MBCP supporters in the audience right now. You're making a difference for birds across Maryland every single day. We're here to learn about and celebrate the amazing journeys migratory birds make as they travel to and from their breeding grounds. In fact, last night was a mind-bogglingly busy night for migratory birds. So busy that a new record was set for the biggest night of bird migration ever recorded. Birdcast is a website that tracks birds as they migrate each spring and fall using weather radar stations across the US. And last night, Birdcast recorded over 1.25 billion, that's billion with a B, birds in the air migrating south. In Maryland, almost 34 million birds passed overhead. That's a lot of birds. Each year, billions of birds make a dangerous journey away from their winter residence to go breed somewhere else. Sometimes this is a short trip moving from one state to another. Other times, it's a globe-trotting expedition covering thousands of miles, often with no land in sight. Over all of this unfamiliar terrain, a lot can go wrong for these little birds. They have to deal with bad weather, predators, disorienting lights, food shortages, turbines, power lines, traffic, pesticides. It's a tough time to be a bird. Many die en route, but the ones that make it settle down for a few months before starting it all over again. For me, I think the most incredible part of migration happens right now in the fall. The adults who have all experienced at least one full round of migration head back to wherever they came from. But the youngsters, newly hatched this year, are also taking part, often unaccompanied by adults. Somehow, even though they only learned to fly a few weeks ago, they are taking to the night sky and flying south, using physiological tools to navigate that science is still unraveling. Birders often refer to migration as magical, and I'm one of them. To me, the spectacle of migration is one of the most magic-filled experiences you can partake in. And that magic is what World Migratory Bird Day is all about. Ensuring that this magic persists is at the core of the work that I do here at MBCP. It's why proper siting of energy developments is so critical. It's why protecting the sites that birds use to rest and refuel is so important. And it's why we work together as a conservation community to integrate birds and people in the best way possible. I'm so excited for you to meet our speakers and for us all to celebrate the extraordinary migratory birds passing through Maryland right now. Our panelists today include Pamela Kellett, Dr. Claire Nemes, and Lewis Grove. Pamela Kellett works as the Bird City Maryland coordinator here at MBCP. Bird City Maryland is a recognition program that encourages communities in Maryland to implement sound bird conservation practices. Previously, Pamela has worked as a schooner captain, a pre-K forest school teacher, and an international project coordinator for trash interception systems located in rivers. She holds an MS in environmental science and policy from Johns Hopkins University. She loves to hike with her dog, talk to her plants, and spend time on any type of boat. Dr. Claire Nemes got hooked on birding in Maryland and has worked on avian research projects across the US. She completed her PhD and postdoctoral research in migration, ecology, and conservation at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science Appalachian Lab in Frostburg. Claire recently started a new postdoc on American kestrel movement at the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute in Virginia. She's a big fan of confusing fall warblers and loves everything about bird migration. Lewis Grove brings a background in science and law to American Bird Conservancy. He is a lifelong birder and has worked across the US as a point counter, nocturnal flight call researcher, and hawk watcher. More recently, Lewis completed a law degree and served as a housing advocate for veterans during the pandemic. He is incredibly excited to return to the world of bird conservation and to join American Bird Conservancy. Lewis lives in Waterbury, Vermont, and enjoys peak bagging on the side. All right, and with that, we are going to get into our first presentation. Pamela. Your slides look great, Pamela.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Gabriel, for the introduction. And I'm so excited to kick off the panel by describing the Bird City Maryland program and why we think it's so important for our communities to celebrate World Migratory Bird Day. So Gabriel and I didn't discuss this, but I had to take a screenshot of the incredible migration from last night's migration dashboard with the Birdcast database. And I was just blown away, as he was, by the number of birds. This is just that cross Maryland alone last night, over 33 million birds. So it was pretty spectacular. I just explored this website, and I love that it also gave you this sort of picture on the side of the birds. Well, you can't see them as they migrate at night, but that they're there, imagining them on this journey, which doesn't have any borders. They don't see boundaries when they migrate, and yet they're undertaking this incredible, dangerous journey, as Gabriel said, and they rely on every community that they pass through to help them keep their journey as safe as possible. And that's what Bird City is all about. So a Bird City community is one that, let's see, sorry. I'm gonna just go back one. There we go. I'm sorry about that. Having a slight tech issue. Works to complete bird-friendly actions in 4 categories: habitat, threats to birds, education and engagement, and sustainability. And people want to help birds, but they don't know how. And so Bird City is like a blueprint for them. The application process has a host of actions in all of the different categories that I just mentioned, so that they can learn about what different actions that they can complete in their community to help make their communities safe for birds and for people. Birds need the same thing that people do. They need clean air, they need clean water, good habitat, and a place to find food. So there's a variety of reasons why different communities choose to undergo the application process. And a lot of our communities in Maryland already have a variety of recognition programs that they've applied for. We have Sustainable Maryland Communities, Bee Cities, Tree Cities, and then now Bird Cities are part of what they're doing to show their pride in their conservation reputation. The Bird City idea started in Wisconsin in 2009, and it was inspired by Tree City USA, which is an Arbor Day Foundation program. And this is a 50-year-old program, and Bird City used it as its model. And currently, Wisconsin has hundreds of bird cities that they recognize through their application process. So once other states started to see the success that Wisconsin was having, they decided to replicate this program in their community or state. And that's what happened here in Maryland. And in 2023, the Bird City Network was formed. And the network basically joins all these different disparate communities under one umbrella and website so that people didn't have to sort of reinvent the wheel of creating an application. And there were 9 founding states in the Bird City Network, and Bird City, Maryland was one of them, as well as 2 countries in Latin America. And these are our founding programs. And then currently, let's see, they've added, sorry about that, 4 more states, as well as another country in Latin America, Brazil, and Tennessee, Caribbean, and Panama are in the process of working with pilot communities. So Bird City, Maryland started in 2019, and they joined the network in 2023. And our goals are, see if I can advance them. I apologize, I'm having a little bit of a hard time with the mouse advance. We celebrate community actions. We educate communities about issues and solutions, and we motivate communities to act in our 4 categories. We welcomed our first community in 2020, the city of La Plata. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you is that each of our communities choose a signature bird to educate and engage their communities. And La Plata chose the purple martin. And they have a gorgeous purple martin statue in their town hall. They have purple martin passports where you can pick up a passport and find all the purple martin houses in their town. They have purple martin banners and purple martins on their sidewalks. And they've really embraced using this bird to engage communities around their Bird City status. And it's really been exciting to see how different communities are really educating using this sort of bird to spark the interest of their town. So we have 13 communities currently in Maryland, and this is a map sharing our communities. And our communities consist of counties, cities, and campuses. And Maryland was the first state to start a Bird City campus program. And we have currently 4 campuses, as well as 2 campuses that are in the application process. And this is just a slide to show the cumulative impact of our communities in 2025. We've completed 254 total actions in our 13 communities, 90 in the habitat category, 25 in threats to birds, 99 in engagement, and 40 in sustainability. And so it's really exciting to see that working together, we can make such a difference for birds in Maryland. And I'm now going to sort of pivot a little bit and talk about why we ask our communities to celebrate World Migratory Bird Day. It's one of the actions that they have to complete as part of their application process. So they basically can celebrate it either in spring or fall migration. And it can look like whatever they want it to look like. But every year, World Migratory Bird Day is has a conservation action theme, and this is an initiative of the Environment for the Americas. And they work globally to protect birds and educate and conserve birds through their World Migratory Bird Day initiative. And so all of our bird city communities get resources around celebrating in their communities. So this year's theme was shared spaces, creating bird-friendly cities and communities. And each year there's a artist that is chosen to create the beautiful artwork and posters around the theme. And let's see, I'm just going back one, sorry. And this year's theme, I really like it because, well, obviously we're creating bird-friendly cities here in Maryland, but also inside the poster are 7 actions that are kind of hidden, and you have to kind of look for them. And I'm going to talk about them in the next slide. But the resources that are provided by the Environment for the Americas are shared with our communities so that they can educate and engage their communities when they celebrate World Migratory Bird Day. So hidden in our poster, see if I can get that to advance. Sorry. So sorry. Information that we share about planting native plants, making windows visible to birds, dimming lights for birds at night, keeping cats indoors, using less chemicals or pesticides, saying no to plastics, and all of these things. There's a host of resources that communities can access to share when they celebrate and throughout the year. And all of these were actually individual themes at different times, but are now kind of embedded into ways to create a bird-friendly city. So as Gabriel said, migratory birds face a lot of challenges in cities. And so we choose to celebrate World Migratory Bird Day because it raises awareness about birds' amazingness. They're incredible, and we need to help them on this journey that they're undertaking. And celebrating World Migratory Bird Day really allows our bird city communities to showcase the actions that they're doing to help birds. So that kind of wraps it up for me. I'm really excited to hear about Claire and Lewis's work, and I'll turn it back to Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Pamela. That was great. We are ready for Claire's presentation. Claire is going to be telling us about some of her research on migratory stopover sites. I'm excited to hear what she has to say. Your slides look great, Claire. Take it away.
Hey, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Gabriel, for the introduction, and thank you, Pamela, for telling us about the great work that you're doing with Maryland, with Bird City, Maryland. Yeah, I'm going to discuss our efforts to map out stopover locations for birds across the state of Maryland. And coincidentally, I also was boggled by the amount of birds that were in the air last night. So I think that this is really this extraordinary phenomenon that we all kind of have been getting to witness in real time. But you know, as Gabriel and Pamela mentioned, there was a huge night of migration that was picked up on Birdcast last night. This is a screenshot from even before it hit that 1.2 billion number of birds in flight over the eastern United States. You know, and all those birds took off and they flew for hours through the night, maybe all night long. But then eventually all those birds had to land somewhere. And maybe some of you, like I did, headed out first thing this morning to your favorite birding spot in hopes of encountering some of these migrants as they stopped over to replenish their energy reserves after this incredible journey the previous night. And as we've been learning, these periods of stopover are so important. Birds are landing in unfamiliar areas. They need to quickly assess the habitat and find nutritious food, try and get some rest while they're avoiding predators, weather, other hazards. And, these nocturnal flights are really impressive, but it actually turns out that for every 1 hour that birds spend in flight, they actually spend about 7 hours on stopover during migration. So they're refueling, they're resting, they're sharing information with each other, they're staying safe so that they can undertake the next leg of the journey. So protecting stopover sites for migrating birds in spring and fall is really essential to ensure that they get where they're going. And in order to do that, we need to understand where those stopover hotspots are distributed, where there's high concentrations of birds stopping during migration, and what features are associated with those high densities. And so stepping back a bit, Maryland, like all states in the United States, has something called a State Wildlife Action Plan, or SWAP, which guides the conservation of wildlife and their habitats in the state. So state agencies like the Maryland Department of Natural Resources has to update its plan every 10 years, and as a condition of receiving federal funding through the Fish and Wildlife Service for the state grants program. And state wildlife action plans tend to focus heavily on breeding habitat, but Maryland is somewhat unique in that over the years it has really put a lot of effort towards understanding and protecting habitat for birds during migration as well, which is thanks mostly in large part to the efforts of DNR's Wildlife and Heritage Service Science Program Manager, Gwen Brewer, who some of you know. But one of the best ways to determine important stopover sites for migrating bird communities over large spatial scales is by using data from weather surveillance radars. So to reiterate, as we know, the majority of migratory land bird species in North America, that includes warblers, and thrushes, and vireos, migrate at night when the air is cooler and less turbulent, there's fewer predators, and when the stars are visible to help them migrate, or to help them navigate. But obviously that is really difficult to observe directly. We can't get out there and bird not very effectively at night. I did once manage to get a picture of this bird crossing the moon during migration, but it is, and so it is happening, but it's difficult to quantify. But that's where radar comes in. So the National Weather Service radars are, as we know, running continuously 24/7. They cover a large fraction of the United States. And as we've seen, these NexRad radars detect birds in flight along with precipitation. This has gotten picked up by social media a lot recently by meteorologists, but it is a phenomenon that has been happening, since time immemorial. And we actually know that that radars have been picking up birds almost since the technology was developed. So something like Birdcast uses weather radar data to provide forecasts and monitoring of birds in flight, those migration traffic rates of the hourly numbers of birds that are passing over. But we can also use weather radar data to tell where those birds are coming from. So what locations were they using as stopover on the ground before they take off into the air? And this is because of a kind of unique feature of their biology, where birds are taking off synchronously shortly after sunset. And so let's watch this pattern of departures this is the DOX or KDOX radar in Delaware that covers the eastern shore of Maryland. And, you can see here, there's, a lot of activity that's just really starting to ramp up. The timestamp here is in UTC, but so this is about, half an hour to an hour after sunset, that birds really take off en masse into the air, and then they get picked up as they are flying. But because they're leaving the ground in this pretty short time window after sunset, this enables us to take a snapshot of the radar scans right early on in Exodus when birds are taking off, but before they disperse too far away from where they were on the ground. And then we can really kind of map that back and say, where were these birds, spending the previous days? So we do that we get data from many radars over many years, and then we map out where these high density stopover hotspots are located. And so our objective was to create maps of migratory stopover density, see where in Maryland specifically birds concentrate during migration, which the Department of Natural Resources will use in its State Wildlife Action Plan to decide priority areas for conservation and protection. And so for this project, we used data from 6 NextRad radars that overlap and kind of surround Maryland during spring and fall migration for 8 years from 2015 to 2022. And when we are using weather radar data, we first have to actually filter out the weather and everything else that isn't birds. So we go through this really strict data screening process where we remove any nights that have precipitation, weird patterns where the radar beam wasn't behaving properly, debris and dust that can get picked up in the air and is also being detected by radar, as well as areas of clutter, which are caused by structures on the ground. Sometimes these are wind turbines. So we don't want any of these things to be confused with the birds. So we filter all this out, and we end up screening out more than 70% of nights in a season. So we're pretty confident using our strict filters that what we're left with is birds and not anything else that's getting picked up. And then for these models, we fitted boosted regression trees with radar reflectivity, which is that measure of bird density, as a function of a suite of geographic and habitat variables, things like elevation and proportion of forest, artificial light at night, and to determine which of these are most influential in explaining where birds stop over within the radar coverage areas specifically. And then because the radars don't cover the entirety of the state, we use spatial interpolation techniques to predict the average stopover density across the state of Maryland, basically filling in those gaps between the radar domains. And we end up with maps of predicted stopover density for both spring and fall at 250-meter spatial resolution. This scale here is actually in centimeters squared per hectare of reflectivity, which is kind of a odd measure to wrap your head around, but it does reflect densities of birds. And in spring, you can see there's high densities along the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries in parts of southern Maryland, some little spots along the Potomac, and then in western Maryland at higher elevations. And then for the autumn, we actually do see fairly similar patterns to the spring. Overall predicted stopover densities are somewhat higher in the autumn than spring, which, as Gabriel was alluding to earlier, that makes sense. There's more birds in the fall after the breeding season when you have all those young of the year that are migrating for the first time along with all of the adults. Nope. But there's a few things that I want to point out and just to take away here is that we do know that the general taxonomic groups of nocturnal migrants that are getting picked up, but the radar picks up biomass of all birds that are in the airspace. And so it's not species specific. It doesn't tell us which areas are really important to one particular species or another. So this is really getting kind of at the community level, these large biomass flows of birds. So in order to get more species specific information, we'd need to turn to something like complementary sources of data like eBird. And also, you'll kind of notice there's not a lot of hotspots that show up at the same numbers in the center of the state, but that doesn't mean those areas aren't important. As Pamela pointed out, sometimes areas that are in cities and suburbs where there's the only little areas of habitat can be really important for birds during migration. So there's plenty of locally important stopover areas within the central region, as well as in the eastern and western parts of the state. And then just to sum it up, migration is this incredible period in the life cycle of birds. They have all kinds of, fantastic adaptations. They've evolved to be really, really good at migration. But we have been modifying both stopover habitats and the airspace in ways that make it more hazardous for migrants to complete this journey that they have evolved over millions of years to do. And so mapping out these hotspots of high stopover density is going to allow wildlife managers and conservation groups in Maryland to target their conservation actions and think about where they can reduce those threats most effectively in the most important areas for migrating birds. So we're finishing up these maps, and they will be included in the 2025 Maryland State Wildlife Action Plan revision and hosted on DNR's GIS portal. But in addition, we're also developing an interactive dashboard that will allow you to explore stopover maps and data in more detail, which Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership has generously agreed to host, which is fabulous. So stay tuned for that in the near future, and you'll be able to explore these maps in more detail yourself and learn more about them. Okay, so I just wanted to really quick thank you to the folks who were involved in one way or another on some of this research. And thank you also to Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership for the invitation to present, and thank you all for attending. I hope you've been getting out there to visit some of your favorite stopover hotspots this fall migration in Maryland. And, you know, maybe that's your own backyard, maybe that's a state park, but hope you're getting out there. All right, thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Claire. I just want to go and pore over those maps that you showed. And Lewis, we are ready for you. We are going to be hearing about renewable energy from Lewis.
Okay.
Your slides look excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gabriel. Thanks, Claire and Pamela. Always amazing to hear about bird migration. Can't get enough of it. And Pamela, hearing about Bird City, Maryland just makes me jealous and want ABC to bring it to Vermont, where I'm from. Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. Really appreciate to see all of you here. Want to learn more about BirdSmart Wind. This is a topic that I believe is of tremendous importance right now. These are transformative times in the energy world. We have a huge challenge to rise to meet, and we need to balance out that sort of rapid growth demanded by this moment in clean energy with careful planning. And that's not easy to do. It's always hard to move fast and move carefully at once. But you saw some of the really amazing migration tools that Claire is using. So we do have these amazing, these new tools, and they can give us some really good reasons for hope in terms of solving this problem of clean energy that is good for birds. I won't rehash the climate change specter that threatens all of us. It threatens birds, it threatens humans, habitats throughout the United States. This is a kind of a map of the anticipated migrations of ecosystems as things move northward, as the world warms. We need a clean energy transition. It is very apparent to us. It is the challenge of our time, for sure, as environmentalists. And it's kind of a weird thing for us because the environmental movement for so long has been stopping projects, this mill or this logging or drilling or whatever it might be. So moving fast and doing things quickly is sort of almost antithetical to the way we have set up our regulations and our laws around these things. But like I said, we have an opportunity here with new tools at our disposal that we don't need to make sort of the same mistakes of the past as we've gone through technological innovations in our human societies. I often harken back to the building of dams on rivers throughout the country a century ago and more. Dams were put in for lots of good reasons, for hydropower and for recreation and for agriculture and flood control. In some places, though, they weren't worth it. The effects upon hydrology or biology were so immense that these things were just, the cost was too much. So they went in at public cost, they degraded public resources while they were there, and then they had to come out at public cost. And we all kind of lost for that. So we don't want to make the same mistake with wind energy. We want to get this right from the start. So why does BirdSmart Wind Energy matter? One of the things we hear so often is, why even worry about wind kill of birds when things like cats or collisions with windows kill so many more birds? Cats kill 2 billion birds a year. Wind collisions kill a huge number of birds per year. Wind kills maybe 1 million, 2 million birds per year. It's orders of magnitude less. So why does that matter? That's such a lower number. And there's a couple of reasons that it does. One is that wind energy development is still on the rise. Like I said, we need this rapid build out. The number of turbines on the environment is rapidly increasing. The number of cats on the environment is probably not necessarily rapidly increasing. But also, absolute numbers don't tell the whole story. One of the poster birds for wind energy conflicts is golden eagles, which tend to be really prone to collisions with turbines. Turbines kill hundreds of golden eagles in the United States every year out of a population of a few tens of thousands of them, 31, 32,000. Whereas cats are not killing many golden eagles out there at all, as far as we can tell. So there are, these individual species. There's a few of them that are impacted heavily by wind, where it is a real population level threat to them, even if it's not a huge number of individual birds that are being killed. And even aside from mortality, displacement is also kind of a major concern. Airspace is a habitat, just like grasslands and forests are habitats. Birds need those habitats, and the more structures we put in there, the more obstacles, then those birds are excluded from using those habitats. We see this a lot in open country birds in particular, things that are evolved to have wide horizons. Grassland birds, open ocean birds, they tend to be just very highly wary of tall structures on the horizon and give them a wide berth. On the right here, you can see a graphic from a study for an offshore wind facility in Europe, where the black lines are all different transmitter tracking of birds flying around the red dots that is a wind turbines. So those seabirds you can see are avoiding the turbine, which is good in that they're not being hit by them, at least, or not colliding with them. But you can see they're obviously, if that's a really good foraging ground, those birds are now excluded largely from using that. Or if that's important breeding habitat, like for the sage grouse on the left side there, open country, prairie chickens, sage grouse, these types of things are highly wary of tall structures. Presumably, those are good perches for predators to take them. And so these birds are easily displaced from habitat by turbines. So you don't want turbines near a sage grouse lekking area, for instance, where all these birds are relying upon to breed. So there's this displacement effect that is also there alongside the direct mortality. So at ABC, we advance what we call bird smart wind principles. There's about 7 of these that encompass things like thorough planning beforehand, transparency in the process, plans for decommissioning when finished. We believe that public resources like wildlife should get the full protection of the law, and that developers should be working towards that in a transparent way that we can see as the public, we can see what is happening. I've highlighted a couple of these, number 2 and number 5. Number 2 deals with siting of turbines. Just like in real estate, location, that is super important with turbines. And this happens on a broad scale and on a smaller scale, both. You don't want a new wind facility on the Texas coast where you have these giant migration flights coming in, or on the Maryland coast in some of these areas that Claire showed us, where there's just a lot of songbirds moving through the sky. That's a bad place to put turbines. You're just going to have a higher inherent rate of collisions there. Then on a smaller scale, individual turbines within a facility can have an outsized impact. We see this with golden eagles migrating down ridges, like in Western Maryland. These birds are using very specific parts of the ridges as wind hits them and creates updrafts for them. And putting a turbine in one spot versus putting it 100 meters over might make a huge difference. And it's a lot easier to put it in the right spot to start than it is to move a turbine once it's on a ridge top, of course. So siting is just really important from the start. Number 5, I have highlighted there also mitigation. And mitigation systems, these are similarly becoming increasingly important. And these are really supercharged by the access to incredible new data sets that we have out there, that Claire was talking about with Birdcast, for instance. ABC's wind risk assessment map, you see this kind of embodies the principle around siting, right? So red areas on our map, and you can check this out on our website if you want to. The red areas on here are, we consider to be off limits to wind. A facility in those kind of locations would be, the threats to birds would be so immense that the power, clean energy production is not worth it for birds. The other shaded areas, orange and yellowish areas, represent sort of middle levels of concern, where we think that it's not a great spot, but if you had the right mitigation system in place, that you might still get a pretty good bird-friendly wind turbine. And then the white areas, the clear areas, that's not to say that there aren't concerns there. Any turbine out in the world is probably going to eventually pose a threat to some bird at some point. That's just how structures are in the environment. But in relatively speaking, the clear, the white unshaded areas here are what we think pose less of a threat to birds for facilities there. I mentioned mitigation systems and golden eagles being a poster bird for these sorts of issues. We have these just incredible technologies these days to help us that can really balance this need to provide power production without taking that many birds. We have these incredible sort of smart AI camera systems that they can put out amongst these wind facilities now, and they can identify hawks, a mile or two away. As a former hawk watcher, I worry about job security for humans when such systems are introduced, of course. But they're incredible what they can do, and they can actually predict where that eagle is going to fly amongst a wind facility and can turn off individual turbines as the bird moves. So you get this very precise control for danger without losing much power. But even broader based mitigation systems can provide benefits. As we've had a theme today, there's great timing of last night's just incredible bird flight. That's not a good night to have turbines running across a lot of areas. Birds are moving across broad fronts. There's just a lot of birds in the air. And you can imagine on these heaviest flight nights in the spring and the fall, curtailment of turbines, stopping them from spinning in these major flyaway spots, just kind of broadly on a dozen or a couple dozen nights in the spring and fall would actually mitigate and reduce the mortality of birds by a huge chunk. These systems, the data is still coming in. The smart systems are capable of doing 90-95% reductions in mortality for large birds like golden eagles or California condors or griffon vultures in Spain. But even the broader based systems can reduce mortality by estimates of 60, 70, 80% of birds involved. And that's with power production losses of a fraction of a percent, 0.2, 0.3% of power loss to save most of the birds. So that's a pretty good deal, we think. We would love to see tools like Birdcast informing a future curtailment scheme. When a Birdcast is saying there's going to be a lot of birds flying tonight, the law should say, hey, we're going to turn off turbines where they are predicted to be to save those birds. So what can you do? I think it's good to end on a positive note. We don't necessarily, I wouldn't say solar energy is necessarily a panacea. It's not a silver bullet, but energy can be a tough thing to take action on at the individual level. It's hard to check a bird smart energy box on your electric service. So solar energy, photovoltaic solar we would say would be one of the more bird friendly types of energy out there. Certainly, putting it in high quality habitat is not wise. We're challenging. We're kind of working against a new solar facility in New York State right now that's on a short-eared owl grassland. This beautiful, rich grassland that's hosting some of the last short-eared owls in New York State. So that's a bad spot for solar, but a lot of places are pretty good spots. But at the end of the day, distributed solar on the human-built environment, on rooftops, parking lots, feedlots, highway medians, you name it. We think that putting it in places where it's already impacted, it's not bird habitat, and where that energy is going to be actually used, so you don't need big transmission lines, that's the most bird smart energy. So, support distributed solar, houses, all of that, and alongside just energy conservation generally, of course. So with that, I just want to thank everyone again for hosting us tonight and for everyone for joining us. So thank you.
Thank you, Louis. That was excellent. I really enjoyed that and am now very excited to be asking our panelists a few questions. So Claire and Pamela, if you want to come back onto the screen, that would be terrific. And Louis, maybe I'll just start off with you. Turbines can be tough on birds when they aren't sighted well, like you talked about. Do they impact other taxa as well? And if they do, does ABC take that into account when making sighting recommendations?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the hot points right now politically for offshore wind, of course, is potential whale impacts. And that's been a major flashpoint for the development out there. In terrestrial systems, a big concern is with bats, certainly, maybe even more so than birds. In fact, I would say more so than birds. The risks to bats are just immense. Bats tend to be somewhat attracted to turbines more so than birds. They tend to have more severe results when they do come near turbines. They're more sensitive to collision risk at them. And simply put, bat populations are still kind of a mystery. We know so much less about bats as compared to birds, through the army of enthusiastic birders that are out there filling eBird all the time. We have just a tremendous amount of bird knowledge. There's no real eBat. I mean, I'm sure they're iNaturalist and whatever else, but the amount of bat citizen science pales in comparison. I would say at ABC, we certainly focus on birds, but this is, like I said, this is air, this is habitat, and we're trying to conserve a habitat in general. So regularly we work with Bat Conservation International and folks on the same issues. Some of the same curtailment systems work really well for bats. My hope is we can use birds as the great messengers they are to save ecosystems more broadly, and bats would be part of that 100%. So.
Pamela, how do birds, you mentioned signature birds, how do bird cities select those signature birds?
Great question. So usually a bird club member is part of the team that fills out a bird city application. And the bird club member who's very familiar because they're on the ground doing bird counts or atlasing or a big sit will recommend 5 birds to the community that would best represent their community, birds that they would see either during migration or year-round residence, breeding season. It doesn't really matter. But something that would definitely be meaningful to the community. And then the way that the communities choose to select it from there varies widely. It can be anything from a social media campaign. We've had a middle school read the birds over their announcements each day, and then the middle schoolers chose their community bird. So there's been a lot of creativity around how the selection process happens, but usually that suite of birds is suggested by a bird club member who's helping the application process.
That's cool. I love that about the school kids. Claire, artificial light was one of the variables that you listed under your model, and there were only about 4 variables. So that makes me think that you thought that was a pretty important variable. Why did you think that might be so important in your model?
Yeah, we actually used a lot more than that. Those were sort of broad groupings of variables that I put on, so I didn't put the whole entire list into that slide. But there have been a number of radar studies that have found that birds are at these broad spatial scales attracted to artificial light at night. So it seems to be something that as they are flying and they can perceive it on the horizon, it can actually draw them in. In our models, we actually found a little bit opposite of a pattern, at least at these smaller scales, where they seem to be avoiding it a little bit more, but it was included there because it does play an influential role in predicting where these stopover high densities are. That's not a thing that we would want, to say, oh, we'll put out some more lights if you want to, have more birds stopping over, right? Because that increases their risk of collisions and, or getting, basically what they call entrained circling lights because they get disoriented like moths. But yeah, there are a lot of variables that we investigated in this model. And again, I hope that when we get this Shiny app up on the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership website, we'll have more details on that and you can explore that a little bit further. But great question.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. how important then is it if you're just a homeowner, like maybe you live in a kind of a rural area, and hey, you saw on Birdcast that there was going to be a big migration night. How important is it for you to turn out the lights just on your farm or your home, or as an individual? Does that matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer is yes. We do know that a really high number, and I don't not remembering the percent off the top of my head, but a really large amount of window collisions per year do happen at residential buildings. It's not always these skyscrapers that we think are really, you know, killing dozens of birds. I mean, we've all had, I'm sure, walked outside and seen a dead bird by, a window at your house. And so that, yeah, absolutely turning off lights if you can do it in a safe way, or not having lights that are beaming up into the sky that are more angled downwards. I know there's a lot of recommendations, and Pamela might have more thoughts about that in terms of at sort of like a city level. But I think it also gets into Lewis's point of if you can minimize the amount of electricity that you're using, that also has these indirect benefits. So I think it's a win-win no matter what.
Lewis, we had a question in the chat when you were talking about turbines about painting one of the blades black and whether that would impact anything. Can you talk a little bit about that idea?
Yeah, there's some, there's been a couple of studies now that have investigated that question. There is some promising data out there that maybe that helps birds to see the turbines. There's a whole field now growing around bird vision science and how we can use that to sort of decrease both collision risk for windows, but also things like turbines. A spinning turbine gets what we call motion blur, right? So it moves so fast that birds can't quite perceive that there's a solid object there. So sometimes that painting sometimes can help to help reduce that illusion somewhat by creating a contrast by different parts of that motion. There's been some hopeful stuff, some less hopeful studies. There's some really fascinating new experimentation with UV paints that will stand out to birds much more so than normal paints. So I think it's a hopeful one. We certainly support any kind of technology, especially one so basic as that, to reduce collisions. So I think there's some promise there. Still needs some more investigation. There's an ongoing study right now in Wyoming, which is kind of one of the epicenters of golden eagle and turbine collisions. I think it's in the second year of a 3-year study that'll hopefully provide us some of the first data from the US actually on that question.
Oh, wow.
Europe so far. So
now you, at the very start of that, you said bird vision science, not just vision science. So does that mean that birds see very differently from us? Like, can I not just assume that if I'm looking out that I see what a bird sees?
Yeah, actually it's one of those things I still don't know a whole lot about myself. It's just on kind of the edge of the turbine questions with this motion part of it. Certainly, I know birds can see in spectrums, parts of the spectrum we cannot, like I mentioned, UV. I just got some stickers for my house windows recently that have UV, UV visibility on them as well to reduce collisions with the windows here. So I know that UV is a good one, that birds can see that better. But my understanding is mostly that birds can see similarly to we do, right? A lot of color, they see very well, and maybe a little bit better. So,
Pamela, why you focused on Bird City, Maryland, not anything else. It's not Fish City, it's not Deer City, it's Bird City. Why do you think that birds are such a good choice to focus on for creating better communities for both the environment and for people?
I love that question. I think my biggest reason is the most accessible wildlife that we see. So if you live in a city, no matter where you live in a city, you're going to see a bird every day. And I don't think there's any other wildlife that you can really say that about. So I think that birds are very engaging because you can see them. They have such incredible variety. And it really sparks a lot of interest for anybody who's interested in wildlife. So I think they really function as this incredible kind of connection for people to nature, which I think is really important. And then I think they're also kind of the canary in the coal mine thing. So they definitely, you know, they need things that are so critical to the health of the planet. And so I think they make a great choice for our focus. I mean, a fish city would be an interesting undertaking, but we live
Maybe good for Atlantis, right?
maybe in one of my former careers that you mentioned, that would have been something that I would have been interested in. But I do think that it's just a great choice for engaging communities. And I think it's really easy to have, just like seeing how the Signature Bird program has worked, that communities have been really creative with having birds kind of be a spokesbird for their city. And that has been a really great way of that's kind of played out in Bird City, Maryland.
All right, I've got one question left, and it's going to be the same one for all three of you. Louis, I'll start with you, and then we'll go Claire, and then we'll go Pamela. What is one thing that you hope people will take away from this webinar and share with a friend? Louis?
I would say that, wind and birds is not simple. I think it's a highly politicized issue these days. There's a lot of folks out there that want to demonize wind energy as a scourge for birds, and folks out there that want to paint it as capable of saving us from all kinds of ills. And the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? We need lots of wind energy, but there are some concerns. There are some real concerns for some birds. They're solvable. We just need the right systems in place. So it's a complex problem. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel for it, though, and so I would just make sure you don't see this in a simplistic way. Will be the thing.
Claire?
I would say I think we're probably all here enamored of the phenomenon of migration, and unfortunately, it has been something that it has just been more challenging to study than than breeding season. And I hope that folks recognize how important that it is to make sure these migrants, make it safely to their destinations, and that that really can start with local action and with things that you can do in your own yard, your own neighborhood. A lot of folks I see are posting in the chat, really great recommendations and resources, and obviously the actions that Bird City is taking. But it is certainly something where it's this amazing phenomenon that is happening all around us, and I hope that you get out there and tell your friends, if they're not already stoked about migration, why it's so great, and how we have all these really fantastic tools now to really make it so much more clear and understand it better than we ever have before.
Pamela, what do you think?
I think I'd like people to recognize that small towns can do big things. When I think about our impact state slide that I had, and I think about all these little communities throughout Maryland that are working at this very local level to complete actions that are bird friendly. And I find that very hopeful. So it's not just big cities that are doing big things, but I really find it really exciting to work with small communities and see how excited they are and how proud they are to become a bird city. So I think that's really my biggest thing I'd like people to know is, if you live in a little town, and you're in Maryland, maybe they want to be a bird city because they are doing some great things for birds.
Well, thank you so much to the three of you. And Louis, Claire, Pamela, it has been a pleasure. I've certainly learned a lot. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. All registrants will receive a link to the recording, and all links will be shared via email in just a few days. Again, the conservation efforts you've heard about today are only possible thanks to MBCP supporters like you who care about birds and believe in MBCP's mission to conserve them. Will you help share the wonder of bird migration with Marylanders by making a gift to support MBCP now? You will be directly supporting the critical conservation efforts that MBCP is engaged in. Visit marylandbirds.org/donate now to do that. Or give via the secure donation form you'll be redirected to after today's presentation ends. Thank you for caring about birds, and good birding.